black veteran had enough of Karen trespassing in his garden, so he makes her regret it. Marcus Johnson stood back, wiping sweat from his brow as he surveyed his garden with quiet pride. The late afternoon sun caught the vibrant colors of his prize-winning dahlias, casting long shadows across the immaculately maintained lawn. At 58, the retired Army veteran had found peace here among his plants, a sanctuary crafted over 7 years since returning home from his final deployment. "Not bad for today," he murmured to himself, his deep voice carrying across the quiet suburban street. His garden had become his therapy, helping to quiet the memories of 25 years of service that sometimes still haunted him at night. The neighbors called it the Jewel of Oakwood Terrace, and the 3 Garden of the Season plaques mounted beside his front door confirmed their assessment. Marcus was looking forward to a quiet evening on his porch with a cold drink and the satisfaction of a day's work well done. But the tranquility he had carefully cultivated was about to be disturbed. Catherine Whitfield, Karen, to everyone in the neighborhood except to her face, had moved into the blue colonial 3 doors down just 3 months ago. Marcus had noticed her watching him work from her window on several occasions, but he'd thought nothing of it until their first interaction. "You're doing it all wrong," she'd called from the sidewalk one morning, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to being listened to. "Roses need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight to thrive. You've planted them in partial shade." Marcus had smiled politely, nodding as he continued to work. "These are Olympiad roses, ma'am. They actually prefer afternoon shade in our climate. Been growing them for 5 years now." She'd frowned, clearly unsatisfied that he hadn't immediately taken her advice. "Well, I was president of the Westview Garden Club before I moved here, so I think I know a thing or two about roses." That had been just the beginning. Soon she was stopping by daily, offering unsolicited advice on everything from mulching techniques to watering schedules. Marcus had maintained his politeness, a habit ingrained through decades of military discipline, but he started to feel the weight of her intrusions. Then came the day he caught her cutting his prized blue hydrangeas. "Excuse me," Marcus said, having spotted her from his living room window. "Those flowers aren't public property." Karen had the audacity to look offended. "I'm just taking a few for my dinner party centerpiece. It's not like you're selling them." She continued snipping, dropping the cuttings into a basket looped over her arm. "I'd appreciate it if you'd ask permission before taking anything from my garden," Marcus said firmly, his patience wearing thin. "This is private property." "Don't be so selfish, Marcus," she replied with a dismissive wave. "Gardens are meant to be shared. Besides, I'm actually helping you. Pruning encourages better growth." After she left, his next-door neighbor Tom came over to commiserate. "She did the same thing to my vegetable garden," he admitted. "Took all my ripe tomatoes, said they were getting too ripe anyway. Sorry I didn't warn you sooner." Marcus shook his head. "It's all right. Maybe she just needs clearer boundaries." But clear boundaries weren't in Karen's vocabulary. Within a month, Karen had escalated from taking flowers to bringing her friends to tour his garden while he was at VA appointments. He returned home one afternoon to find 4 women wandering among his plants, touching the delicate blooms and taking photos. "Ladies," Marcus called out, forcing a polite smile, "I don't believe I'm hosting a garden tour today." "Oh, Marcus," Karen trilled as though they were old friends. "I was just showing the ladies from my new garden club your lovely work. We're documenting local gardens for our neighborhood beautification project." "Beautification project?" Marcus questioned. "Yes, I'm helping coordinate efforts to bring some consistency to the neighborhood aesthetics. Your garden has potential." The way she emphasized the last word made it clear she thought his garden needed her expert touch. Later that week, Marcus discovered photos of his garden on a neighborhood social media page with the caption, "Working with local homeowners to elevate our community spaces. Neighborhood Beautification, Karen's Garden Initiative." When he confronted her, she seemed genuinely puzzled by his objection. "I'm giving you exposure, Marcus. You should be thanking me." The final straw came when he discovered her weeding near his prized Japanese maple, a rare cultivar he'd nurtured for years. Her aggressive pulling had damaged the shallow root system, and the small tree was now showing signs of stress. "Catherine," Marcus barked, abandoning the neighborly familiarity she hadn't earned, "this needs to stop. This is private property, and you're damaging plants that have taken years to establish." She stood, brushing dirt from her expensive gardening gloves. "I was removing invasive species, Marcus. This whole area is overgrown. My garden club agrees that the neighborhood would benefit from a more professional approach." She gestured vaguely toward his careful plantings. Marcus took a deep breath, counting silently as his VA therapist had taught him. "Don't enter my garden without permission again. I don't want to make this a bigger issue than it needs to be." Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. We're neighbors. Neighbors help each other." She patted his arm condescendingly before walking away. As we continue with this story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you're against entitled behavior and superiority complex. Welcome to Mr. Black's Stories. That night, Marcus sat on his porch longer than usual, watching the lights in the neighborhood blink out one by one. 25 years in the army had taught him a thing or two about strategy and patience. The afternoon, Marcus came home to find Karen hosting a full garden party in his backyard. Was the day something finally snapped. 6 women in wide-brimmed hats sat in his lawn chairs, sipping wine among his flowers. A folding table had been set up with a spread of finger sandwiches and pastries. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen at the garden gate, his grocery bags hanging heavily from his hands. The women hadn't noticed him yet, and he took a moment to compose himself, pushing down the anger that threatened to boil over. Then he approached, his footsteps deliberate on the stone path. The chatter died as the group noticed him. "You are trespassing on private property," Marcus stated clearly, his voice carrying the authority of a former master sergeant. "This gathering was not authorized by me, the homeowner." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically for her audience. "Oh, Marcus, don't be so dramatic. We're just appreciating your garden. If anything, you should be flattered we find it worth our time." The other women shifted uncomfortably, some setting down their wine glasses, finally sensing the tension. "This is not a public space," Marcus continued evenly. "You and your guests need to leave immediately." Karen stood, smoothing her expensive linen dress. "We're just finishing up our garden club meeting. We needed an appropriate backdrop for our discussion on sustainable ornamental gardening, and well, you weren't using it right now." Her tone suggested she was doing him a favor by being there. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice steady. "If you keep this up, you're going to regret it." The words came out calm but carried unmistakable weight. The other women began gathering their things, murmuring apologies as they hurried past him. Karen was the last to leave, taking her time collecting her belongings. "Some people just don't understand community spirit," she muttered, loud enough for him to hear, as she finally departed. "No wonder you live alone." Marcus watched until they were all off his property before he went inside, his mind already formulating a plan. 3 days later, Marcus began implementing his strategy. First came the security cameras, 4 high-definition models with night vision capabilities, visibly mounted at key points around his property. Next, he installed clear, private property, no trespassing signs at each entrance to his garden. But Marcus knew Karen well enough by now to realize these conventional deterrents wouldn't stop her. So he got creative. He spent a weekend carefully planting new additions to his garden. Beautiful but strategic selections of rose bushes with particularly vicious thorns, decorative cacti with fine needles, and ornamental barberry shrubs with spike-covered branches. To the untrained eye, they were simply striking new additions to his already impressive garden. To Marcus, they were a defensive perimeter. The motion-activated sprinkler system took more technical work. Marcus installed sensors at key entry points, but with one crucial modification: a 3-minute delay timer. Anyone entering without authorization wouldn't be immediately sprayed, giving them time to venture deep into the garden before the surprise was triggered. His final touch was inspired by his youngest niece's birthday party. Marcus purchased several innocent-looking decorative planters and rigged them with harmless but startling glitter bomb mechanisms that would activate when disturbed. He positioned these special planters among his most photogenic flowers, exactly where Karen and her friends had been gathered during their unauthorized garden party. With his preparations complete, Marcus settled in to wait. Given Karen's pattern of behavior, he knew it wouldn't be long. The following Saturday afternoon, Marcus pretended to leave in his truck, driving around the block before parking on a side street and walking back to his house through a neighbor's yard, with permission, of course. He slipped quietly into his home through the back door and positioned himself at his office window, with a clear view of the garden. Sure enough, within an hour, Karen arrived with 5 members of her garden club in tow. Marcus watched as she confidently led them through his gate, gesturing grandly, as if conducting an official tour. As you can see, ladies, I've been guiding Marcus on proper landscape design principles. He's got good basic material to work with, but the organization needs a professional touch, she was saying as they ventured deeper into the garden. Marcus glanced at his watch and began a silent countdown. The group paused near his prized orchid collection, and Karen reached out to touch one of the blooms. These should really be moved to a greenhouse setting, but he insists on keeping them outdoors during summer. I keep telling him. The sprinklers activated with a sudden hiss, sending powerful jets of water in all directions. The delayed timing had worked perfectly. The group was now deep in the garden, surrounded by Marcus's strategic plantings. Chaos erupted as the women shrieked and scrambled to escape the unexpected deluge. In their panic, 2 of them backed directly into a thorny rose arch, while Karen herself stumbled sideways into a barrel cactus. Their cries of surprise turned to yelps of pain. As they frantically pushed toward the garden exit, one woman knocked over a decorative planter in her haste. There was a soft pop sound, and suddenly the air was filled with a cloud of fine, iridescent glitter that clung to their wet clothes and skin. From his window, Marcus watched with quiet satisfaction as the bedraggled, thoroughly drenched, scratched, and now sparkly group stumbled out of his garden. Karen was in the worst shape of all. Her perfectly coiffed hair plastered to her head, mascara running down her face, several visible scratches on her arms, and covered head to toe in glitter that caught the afternoon sun like a disco ball. "This is assault," she screeched, looking wildly around for him. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Marcus remained out of sight, but his security cameras captured every moment in high definition. The next morning, while Karen was at her weekly hair appointment, Marcus installed one final addition to his garden: a whimsical concrete statue near the front gate. The figure depicted a woman with her hands on her hips, mouth open in mid-lecture, wearing a sun hat and gardening gloves. The resemblance to Karen was unmistakable without being an exact portrait. A small decorative plaque at the base read simply, "Guardian of the Garden." By mid-afternoon, neighbors were slowing as they passed his house, doing double takes at the statue before breaking into knowing smiles. Marcus waved cheerfully from where he was pruning nearby. When Karen finally drove by and spotted the statue, she slammed on her brakes so hard her tires squealed. She stared open-mouthed for a full minute before speeding away. Her face flushed with anger. Marcus received the certified letter from her attorney the next day, threatening legal action for assault with water weapons, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation by statue. He calmly handed the letter to his old army buddy James, now a respected local attorney, who laughed until tears came to his eyes. "Please tell me you want to fight this," James said, wiping his eyes. This is the most entertaining case I've been offered all year. If you're enjoying this story, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more contents like this. And let us know in the comments what you think about Karen's comeuppance. 3 days later, James delivered Karen's lawyer a USB drive containing months of security footage showing her repeated trespassing, flower theft, and unauthorized garden parties, along with screenshots of her social media posts falsely claiming involvement in his garden's creation. He also included copies of the clearly posted "No Trespassing" signs visible in the footage of the sprinkler incident. The lawyer's response came quickly. "My client has decided not to pursue this matter further." But the consequences for Karen were just beginning. The police issued her a citation for trespassing after reviewing the evidence. The garden club, mortified by their unwitting participation in her trespassing and embarrassed by the footage of their undignified retreat, unanimously voted to revoke her membership. And somehow, Marcus would never admit how, clips from his security footage found their way to the neighborhood social media group, where residents who had suffered similar boundary violations from Karen shared them with gleeful schadenfreude. 2 weeks later, as Marcus was deadheading his dahlias, a shadow fell across the garden bed. He looked up to see Karen standing at the gate, not entering, but waiting to be acknowledged. "May I speak with you?" she asked, her usual confidence notably absent. Marcus straightened slowly, regarding her with caution. "You can speak from there." She nodded, understanding the boundary. "I came to apologize." The word seemed to cost her considerable effort. "I was out of line. With your garden. With you." Marcus said nothing, waiting. "When I moved here, everyone talked about your garden. How beautiful it was, how you'd won all those awards." She gestured toward his plaques. "I was president of my old garden club for 5 years. I was used to being the expert, the one people came to for advice." She paused. "Then I saw what you'd created here without any formal training, and I was jealous." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Apology accepted, Miss Whitfield, but I need to be clear. My property remains off limits unless you're specifically invited." "I understand," she said, and for once she seemed sincere. "And the statue?" Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "The statue stays. Consider it a reminder about respecting boundaries." She nodded once, turned to leave. Mark then hesitated. "How did you learn to grow orchids outdoors in this climate? Mine always die." Marcus considered her for a moment. "Drainage is key, and the right variety." He gestured to a spot several feet away from his garden entrance. "Stand over there, and I'll show you what I mean." 6 months later, Marcus's garden officially opened for monthly guided tours, with all proceeds benefiting the local VA hospital's horticultural therapy program. He'd expanded the program to include workshops for fellow veterans, finding that many of them discovered the same peace among the plants that had helped him heal. Karen had started her own modest garden, occasionally participating in Marcus's workshops from a respectful distance. She'd proven to be a dedicated student once she stopped assuming she knew everything. The neighborhood watched their cautious truce with interest, and gradually, the tension faded. The guardian of the garden statue remained in place, occasionally sporting seasonal decorations, a scarf in winter, sunglasses in summer, added by neighborhood children who had come to see it as a local landmark. And if visitors to Marcus's garden commented on the unusual security measures or questioned why such beautiful flowers were surrounded by so many thorny plants, he would simply smile and direct their attention to the statue. "Let's just say she reminds us all about the importance of good boundaries," he would say, "and that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the most challenging soil." If you believe in accountability and justice, hit subscribe for more stories that will make you stand up and cheer.